Shall we get started? Shall we get started? Is there anybody else out there? Huh? Anybody else? No? One more. One more. Come in. Okay, I think we might get started, everyone. Welcome to this community information forum. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we gather on this evening is Kaurna land. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So we've decided, or Council has decided, to engage with our community, and thank you all for coming this evening. I'd like to welcome staff, elected members, and our wider community here this evening. The Greater Adelaide Regional Plan will mean change for Gawler, and we need to get our heads around that. So we're asking you to assist us in that journey. We will be, there's been a discussion paper for the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan, which has been drafted by the State Planning Commission and released for engagement in August for a period of 12 weeks. Submissions on the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan are being sought till the 6th of November. And I think on your tables, you have an opportunity to put either an individual submission in, you can feed into Council's submission. That's what the aim of this evening is, to get your ideas, get your questions. So some of the questions we may not be able to answer tonight, but we will provide answers to your questions in due course. Some of your questions will be probably the same. Well, most of us will have the same questions. Some of us will have different questions. So on the 6th of November, we have to get our submissions in. And Council will seek to provide a submission to the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan via its 10th of October Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee. You have some questions on your tables. We will get to them in due course. That's just a bit of a conversation starter. You don't need to, you may not agree with all the questions. You may have different questions. We're looking for lots of different questions. So I also note that the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan that has been identified the following issues in Gawler: urban investigations starting in Cuddler and extending north for a master planned extension of Gawler, potential development of Cuddler linked to electrified rail and other local infrastructure, new northern parklands. I still haven't got an answer from the Planning Commission or the department around what that constitutes. So that's, I think, a really important question, and also an inter-urban break, which includes that northern parklands that separate Gawler from the city of Playford. Greater emphasis on open space and expanding the Metropolitan Open Space System, or MOS. So this is an informal session. We don't make decisions at these sessions. We can't make decisions as a council. We are seeking your feedback this evening. So please, if you've got questions, please write them down and we will go through accordingly. If you have a phone, please turn it on silent now. If you need to take a phone call, please take it outside, because it's quite disruptive when you're talking on a phone in the middle of a workshop. So I think I'll hand over to Andrew Goodsell, who's going to provide a presentation, which is the outer northern, I think it's outer northern, is it? Outer northern. He will. So the state government provided us with some slides that we will show you, and this is being done as they are doing metro-wide consultation. We asked that the department and the Planning Commission were here to talk to our community, but they didn't want to, so we couldn't force them to. So Andrew Goodsell is our Executive Manager of Development and Compliance, and I'm going to hand over to him now to provide you with the presentation that we were provided with as elected members only last week. So I'll hand over to Andrew now. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, senior executive, staff of Gawler, members of the public, thanks for attending. Just some housekeeping, firstly, because I tend to launch into things, so I'm going to slow this down and do the basics first. Tea and coffee are at the back, you know where the toilets are. We aim to complete tonight by about 8:30. There are some handouts at the back of the room and on tables. And if you are missing anything, come and see Chris, who will put your hand up, and he'll provide it to you, or I will try my best. There's also some fact sheets and some contact details as well, because as the Mayor pointed out, the submission that you need to provide ultimately is to the Commission, the Planning Land Use Services, but equally we'll be providing a report to Council in October at the Infrastructure, Environment, Sustainability Committee, and that will also reflect, I hope, the priority issues that you've raised. So moving forward from there, as has been said, the state government is updating and reissuing a new Greater Adelaide Region 30-year plan. As we discussed during the night, we are presenting the discussion paper, but in 2024, the discussion paper will lead to a summary of findings paper from PLUS and ultimately a new Greater Adelaide plan. So there was a 2010 plan, a 2017 plan, and there'll be a 2024 plan. This is not the first regional plan, as I've said, but it's important moving forward, given the growth rates in South Australia at the fastest in recorded history under the ABS, 1.6% across the state, that the growth pressures faced across the region and across South Australia are larger than probably previously experienced. Tonight, I will be presenting two PowerPoints. The first will be the presentation from PLUS, so Planning Land Use Services, which is some 31 slides. Some of those slides aren't entirely, I don't think, relevant to us. Some of them deal with inner city issues, so we may move through those relatively quickly. On top of that, there's also our slide pack, which will perhaps look at some of the issues we're addressing as well, which may prompt some questions. That better? All right. All right. In terms of the presentation from Planning Land Use Services, it basically talks about why we should grow and ultimately where. So the document itself is in two parts. There are some principles that are described in it. And there are some fairly generalized maps, which are very hard to work out exactly where things are. And I think that's generally deliberate. The second really is about where we think our council might sit in terms of some of the strategic challenges we face. And ultimately, these converge together because we want to, I guess, brief the department and the commission as to what we think the priorities for the community are. As has been indicated, there is a question as to why we're presenting the plus slides. I guess the answer is we just failed to get them here. They were here last week at a confidential sense to go through questions that the council has had. At that same week, they were also for 7 hours, I believe, at Two Wells doing drop-in sessions. Every council, I imagine, wants to have a face-to-face with their community legitimately with planning land use services, but they can only stretch so far. We'll ask that the questions perhaps be dealt with at the end of the presentation rather than during, just so we can get through this, because what I want to get to is the tables actually identifying the 3 highest priority issues you feel, and then someone other than staff or councillors can be the nominated spokesperson for that table, and they can speak to the 3 issues they have prioritised. If the next table along has exactly the same question as the previous table, well, you've got one less question to ask. There's not necessarily a guarantee. In fact, it's very likely we can't answer all your questions, but if we can't answer it, we'll certainly take it on notice. There will be a roving mic, and I think Chris might be a roving mic. And there's another one over there as well, so don't be shy. All right, I think we'll get into it. Why can't it move? All right. So as I indicated, basically the document's in 2 parts. There is how Greater Adelaide should grow, and secondly, where it should grow. I don't think I need to say more about that. Okay. I'm going to have to move this down. The projections for Greater Adelaide talk about a growth of up to 670,000 people over the next 30 years. That's something like 46% growth. At the moment, the population of Adelaide, in fact, is about 1.6 million, thereabouts. So we're talking about 670,000. We're talking about a population that's going to go well over 2.2 million. There is currently indicated to be a 15-year supply. Ultimately, the whole purpose of the regional plan is to identify what is provided between 15 and 30 years. As you all know, as residents of Adelaide and the region itself, there are a range of constraints. These include character preservation districts. These are quite extensive in places like the Barossa. There's also environment food protection areas, what we call EFPAs. And these are areas where there's significant agriculture, often at horticulture, but they also apply elsewhere. We know that there are constraints in the south, and that under the regional plan, the greatest growth is projected for the Northern Adelaide corridor, which is us. So we'll get on to how Adelaide should grow. There are 4 guiding directions that come out of the discussion paper, and they are about a greener, wilder climate, resilient environment. There's lots of debate about what wilder and greener means. More equitable and socially cohesive place. And I guess the issue with that is it's good to say, but how do you do it? A strong economy built on a smarter, cleaner, regenerative future. And the government's had various conversations about hydrogen and renewables, and I guess that's part of that conversation, and a greater choice of housing in the right places. So there's a conversation about infill development. There's a conversation about greenfield development as well. One of the key aspects of it is the idea of living locally. That's not to suggest that everyone has to stop commuting to Adelaide. It's more that people should have the choice. So if people wish to live in a community and to get ideally employment in that community, access their services, they shouldn't have to commute more than, say, 20 to 30 minutes to do so. The idea of living locally is not unique to Adelaide. This is a conversation that's being had in cities around the world. Again, I guess the question is, how do you go about doing it? We'll go on to the issue of where. I'm not sure how, it's not too bad, how readable that was, but there are 7 principles that are discussed in the Adelaide 30 plan or discussion paper. It's about using the high growth scenario, which is assumed to be the most likely outcome, how the subregions will have their own distinct part to play. I guess it's the heavy lifting, if you like, but I think some places do more heavy lifting than others. Land supply beyond the existing and planned to what is required up to that 30-year horizon to basically 2053 or thereabouts. And then we skirt through that issues of primary land production, protection, landscape, environment significance, and how we can protect those values. One of the challenges, as you'll probably notice going through the document, if you've read it already, is that there is a significant emphasis on residential development, perhaps a little bit less on other things. And that's something we want to tease out tonight. And then prioritising areas for growth, but also the other issues as well, climate change, resilience, the costs, how this is delivered. So the need we talked about is about 300,000 new homes over the next 30 years. And the argument is there's 200,000 homes capacity in terms of the existing planning system, land that's already zoned. So it's really the other 100,000 homes, which is that 16 to 30-year time horizon. If you're familiar with the 30-year plan, it used to have targets of sort of 75, 80% infill development, and that was generally in the inner and middle suburbs, if you like, with a balance in outer. Now the discussion's about whether or not there's more development in places such as Gore and surrounds. And there are key sites clearly within the inner and middle ring areas not continue to be developed. But in terms of greenfield sites, it's corridors such as the Northern Corridor, which will play a significant role. So greenfield, you can probably see on that map some of the circled areas. So you can see that there's areas indicated around Two Wells, Roseworthy, which also really includes Concordia, and there's Dry Creek as well. But there's not much in the south until you get right down to the coast. Murray Bridge is also a priority as well. But you can see in the architecture of the document, it talks about spines. There's a northwestern spine, where on the northeastern spine, and then there's the eastern spine and a southern spine. So that's worth being aware of. The northwestern spine, so we're talking about Riverlea, Two Wells. There are challenges, as you know, if you've travelled to Two Wells in terms of not being on a rail corridor or bus. There are some challenges in that space in terms of wastewater treatment and other capacities, but clearly that's a challenge the government's going to have to deal with. There are some opportunities, however, as well in terms of its proximity to Adelaide, which is clearly why it's been identified. The northeastern spine, which is probably more relevant to us. So we're talking about Roseworthy, investigation areas around Evanston, Cuddler Station, as you're probably aware of, and Concordia. So Concordia, for those who don't know, is supposed to be a code amendment that comes to fruition by the end of next year. Talking about 10,000 dwellings, which is in the order of 24,000 people. There are different projections from time to time, but that's roughly the number that's being looked at. Time frame for development, 20 to 30 years, roughly. It's also talked about a northern parkland. The discussion paper is deliberately generalised as to where that would be. I don't think that work has been done yet. We'd like to put a hand up in the air and say it should be in our LGA. I'm sure there are others who think it should be in theirs, but clearly there's a need for parkland opportunities in Gawler. There's significant growth, and it would certainly potentially could be part of a interurban break. Again, we'll probably discuss that during the night. And there are advantages of the area in terms of proximity to major employment areas, including Edinburgh, and also, if you like, the corridor itself more broadly. I won't go into the eastern spine in too much detail. We can discuss that offline if you wish, but that's about Murray Bridge primarily. The southern spine likewise. The urban infill, I don't think we'll spend any time on that tonight. Clearly, if you go into Adelaide, you can see where that infill is occurring. Some of that's probably would be considered relatively good quality, some of it less so, perhaps. Over the time, though, it's certainly taken a fair bit of the supply and demand in Adelaide, but there are limits to that in terms of key sites. So moving forward, next steps for growth investigations. So there were sort of a few key areas. One was urban corridors. We've talked about that a bit. Satellite cities. You could almost say that Murray Bridge is being talked about in those terms, perhaps. Strategic infill sites, probably more inner and middle ring suburbs than out here. Master plan communities, that might be part of the reality for us in terms of urban investigation areas. I guess, again, the question is about the PDI Act and the type of master plan communities you get, and regenerated neighbourhoods and activity centres. So they're the areas of interest to government. Green space certainly gets a lot of attention in the conversations we've had with Plus, but also more broadly in the community, whether it be urban forests, parks, reserves, or whether it be recreational activity areas. How this comes to pass and how it gets planned and funded will be fundamental to the quality of life in the Northern Corridor. I won't go through the stages of methodology tonight necessarily, other than to say that we're at the discussion paper stage. Early new year, there'll be a report on findings in terms of the community. This is from Plus. And then at probably the middle of next year, you'll see the first version, I imagine, of the Adelaide 30-year plan. And then towards the end of the year, you'd imagine it'll be finalised. And that probably captures that fairly well. I just said. Sub-regional analysis, a little bit of data for those who like to look at graphs. In terms of population projections, as I said, the projection is definitely a sweep up. It's accelerated certainly compared to what it's been in the last 10 years. The reason for that could be multifold. It could be to do with migration. It could be to do with affordability. There could be a range of reasons behind why people are choosing to move to Adelaide, but a lot of it's in migration. And government, as I've already said, has gone with the high projection as to what they believe will happen rather than the medium or low. The wisdom of that is for others to debate. However, I guess they're doing this on the basis of having capacity, and they can always work backwards and reduce supply. But that's what they're planning for, the high demand. In terms of observations and questions for the outer north, which has come from Plus, I guess the first point is more about the historical split. So the split over initially has been infill over greenfield, but I think there's a perception that's going to change. There'll be more greenfield development, certainly in the Northern Corridor. There are some challenges with greenfield sites, even locally in terms of some of the areas south of Evanston where we have, well, the government has land, Renewal SA. There's been challenges with sewer capacity, for example. We know that's a challenge in Roseworthy. We know there will be some challenges in Concordia when it comes to water and sewer as well. So how these get addressed as a whole of government approach to infrastructure will be pretty critical. The idea of infill, if you like, doing the heavy lifting, though, to supply most of the needs of the community and the growth that's predicted is it's unlikely. And even today, when I was talking to some of the council planners at Two Wells, they're talking about a town that's 3,000 people, or that sort of number, going up to 10, 15, 20,000, pick a number. So that's the sort of growth challenge they're facing. Our challenge is different because we're perhaps more established as a community. Our population is quite substantial compared to some of those places, but equally, it's still a significant challenge. Moving forward. All right. I'll just take you on to a couple of slides that we prepared internally because it might be useful in terms of local context, and then we can switch on into perhaps the tables identifying 3 to 5 questions, probably 3 questions, which you prioritise, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A from there. We've already talked about the investigation areas, but certainly the focus for us has been about inter-urban breaks, and a lot of the maps from Plus have talked about those as well. In fact, most of the settlements have inter-urban breaks. It's just unclear how they're supposed to be facilitated, delivered. Back in the day, 2010, there was a concept called the Metropolitan Open Space System, or MOS. In 2017, it got mentioned about 3 times less than it did in 2010. So in planning, we go through trends, and sometimes things become the flavour of the moment. In 2010, MOS was, it appears, the flavour of the moment, but it wasn't explained necessarily how it was going to get delivered. In 2017, it really wasn't mentioned much at all, and I think there was probably less commitment to deliver it, but it never got killed off. So it was still talked about just in passing. And this time it's back again, but it's mentioned a lot more, and it's actually on investigation growth area maps, which suggests it has, perhaps in the eyes of government, more opportunity to be delivered than previously discussed. Now, what it means, is it wilding Adelaide, or is it open space that's for recreational purposes, or a mixture of different things? That's to be determined. In discussions with the Planning Land Use Services, they're saying they're doing some further studies, which they'll commission shortly, and they'll be expanding on their views about this over the next 3 to 6 months. So I guess this is a classic example of not being able to give you an answer, but there's a process they're going through. We've already talked about consultation timeframes. So at the moment, the timeframe for your submissions directly to the Commission and Planning Land Use Services is 6th of November. That's also council's. However, council also has the opportunity to do a final submission, which will be by the council meeting in late November, which is 21st, 22nd. So of November, yeah. We've got an extra 2 or 3 weeks. That's for the final version. And separately to that, we're providing a copy of our submission to the 10th of October IES, as well as some work we've been working on with the southern rural areas, which we've talked about a little bit tonight, but we'll talk about again a bit further. In terms of the highlights, as the Mayor probably mentioned, for us in terms of GARP, the urban investigation area starting in Cuddler, we think that's something which is notable. In the past, there's been a lack of agreement between state and local government, and that's gone on for at least 25 to 30 years and probably frustrated a lot of landowners as well as council. Because I think hopefully there's a desire to bring a resolution and an endpoint to that planning. Since then, there's been electrification of rail, and that brings opportunities as well. I think the parkland idea is something which hasn't been dealt with by previous regional planning, and I think that's an opportunity council should be taking. And I've already mentioned MOS. I put this map on the board as a bit of a conversation starter, really about the idea of where is that functional neighbourhood. If you look at the map on the right, it sort of has arrows pointing all over the place. It has to the due west, got 2 wells. I think there's a relationship there. Whether you're talking about education, healthcare, access to the retail offering that exists in this town, there is a catchment that goes well beyond our local government boundary. It's this idea of a regional centre. Whether those linkages are there in terms of people being able to get a bus or other modes of transport other than a car, that's questionable, but certainly functionally, we are connected to these places. And that's definitely true if you go further north towards Kapunda and other areas. And that's also true, if you like, of some of the towns like Tanunda and Nuri. And I guess ultimately the question for us in our planning and how we position ourselves with the regional plan is about how that relationship should continue and how we can manage that. In terms of investigation areas, we've already talked about that. There isn't anything specifically mentioned in regards to our local government area other than the south. So whilst we have perhaps a bit on the south, that's because that is where the greenfield opportunities exist. And that is the investigation area around Cuddler. What that looks like and how it's done is not something that's really been resolved. And there's a process which we'll have to go through over the next 3 to 6 months in regards to that. However, at least we're starting to have that conversation, I think, which is important. Hopefully you can see that map. The reason this map is shown is just to show some different ideas on how green spaces and an inter-urban break may or may not work. If you start at the bottom southeast corner, where it's all lime green, if you like, That's a combination of state government land plus the lawn cemetery. It doesn't mean we're going to rezone it open space, but it has, if you like, a green space role. To the south of that, there is some landscaped areas which are open space. That's on the City of Playford side. Whether that's sufficient to be an open space corridor or not is a bit of a debatable matter. However, there are elements of open space throughout, and I guess that's what the slide really says. If you look at open space, you have to look at it in terms of a holistic solution. So there's a river corridor, which we think is significant. There's Carbeathan Reserve, which council has a master plan for and is investing significant effort in, has acquired more land to further develop. The Southern Sports Precinct we've talked about, which is that area right next to the yellow hatched area on the western side of Main North Road. That's the Renewal SA land. I'm sure they would have interested views as to whether they felt all their land should be used for recreation. However, from our point of view, we're talking about what we think the community would benefit from. And we think that active recreational space would be a significant resource for the community. On top of that, I've already said some of the MOS, or the Metropolitan Open Space, that extends virtually from Main North Road all the way through to the river. It takes in a lot of private land. Whether it's feasible in terms of the way it's shown, it hasn't been road tested. So I guess we're not going to know the appetite of government to fund a MOS type scheme until probably early next year. And I've already talked about Dew Land and the Gawler Foothills, of course, which has the gas pipeline going north-south through the site. So we've got some questions that we've sort of put to the table, which you'll probably look at when you start thinking about what you think is important. But these were some ideas we had, I guess. I think the definition of an interurban break needs to be thought through and better explained. Everyone seems to have different views as to what it could or should be. Is it a green belt? How should it function? Is there an opportunity to merge interurban breaks with the new Northern Parklands? You could probably heard from what I've said that it might be that it's a bit of a stew and you mix these things together and you end up with some sort of green corridor. There's also questions about Cuddler, how that could get developed in a sensible and reasonable way. And the idea of urban village models. Can we do master planning communities, but do them in a better way? If government's talking about living local, how do we go beyond just simply houses and some local schools? How do we actually look at what community really means on the ground? And I think that comes down to a fairly expensive but necessary conversation about infrastructure for all community needs rather than simply the basics. In terms of our timelines, so we've had an internal workshop on southern rural areas, which you may or may not have seen. Since then, we had the meeting last week with John Stimson and Brett Steiner from Plus talking about the discussion paper. That wasn't live streamed at their request. And then we've got the community forum tonight. And then, as I said, we've got the 10th of October IES meeting where we will talk about a draft submission influenced by what you've said tonight. So your submission will, your thoughts tonight, your questions you'll ask will be prioritised based on how you've ranked them. And then we'll try and get some idea of the recurring themes that arise out of that and see if either we can answer them or more likely forward that onto the department. And then ultimately the commission will do their assessment. So I think that pretty much brings that to an end. And I'm not sure how I've gone for time. Might be a slightly ahead. I am. It's great. So I think I've just a couple other slides I should mention before I finish off. So we talked about the southern rural areas. So we're doing some work on that. You've already talked about the Adelaide 30-year plan. The growth framework, which I should have mentioned, that's just gone to tender. So for those who don't know, at the end of the financial year, there was an agreement for this financial year to do a framework looking at infrastructure and where growth should occur in a sequential way, particularly in regards to required education, healthcare, other services, and this idea, if you like, of community. And it was also tapping into the issue of recreational needs. That's an important piece of work. We haven't had a growth framework of a 20-year nature before. We'd like to think that by the time we finish this, that will take us further down the track in terms of specific needs to argue and advocate to government. And this is me being a bit creative with circles. But in terms of projects we've been doing, just so you know, and how it all connects together, because there is rhyme and reason to this. There is a 2030 plus community plan review that is occurring in the next few months. It's basically already started, had internal workshops on it. On top of that, we've been working on the parking strategy and parking deck, which is what we had a discussion about retail floor demand in Gawler, and ultimately we'll be looking at future parking deck requirements. The integrated transport plan, looking at how we better manage our road network. That's also gone out with 2046. On top of that, we've been working on the southern urban areas and southern rural areas, and you've been aware of that because we've talked about it. The Concordia planning, which is a priority of state government. And another issue which we haven't talked about, but we need to talk about, I think, is more detailed planning for the future of the town centre itself, reviewing the targets and outcomes sought by the 2016 design framework and how we can make some of that a reality in terms of the planning system. So I won't go into further detail on that other than to say there's a lot of balls up in the air and you're not expected to know all this. You won't be quizzed on it. Okay. Now we're open for some preliminary questions if you want, but basically I think we'll get the tables to do their priority 3 to 5 questions. Chris? Yep. Yep. Good question. I'll go back to the slide. Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, one sec. I'm not sure, Megan, can we go backwards in time to have the slide pack? Yeah. Sorry? Okay. Might need to come up here. Sorry. That's why it won't let me go back. Okay, sorry. I might have to get you to have a look for me. It's a fair question. I don't have to have a look at the number. It'd be a lower number. Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. Right, let's have a look. I think the answer Plus would give you is that they didn't really have a choice in the matter. They were just basically given a brief by state government to plan based on that high growth. No, sure. No, I'll find the table. That one? Yep. Okay. So the difference, if you like, in terms of annual change, 21 to 41 was about, looks like about 1,500 dwellings, doesn't it? Per year. Oops, sorry. Yeah, it's touch sensitive. All right, sorry. There'd be a sizable dip. I mean, there's a bigger jump from the low to the medium projection there is from the medium to the high, but there's still a sizable difference between medium and high, yes. That's not working. It's not working. I heard you anyway, so that's fine. So their projections, most projections I've seen from Plus, because they've got a demography unit within Plus, generally go to 2036. So they've stretched it out to 2041, but they haven't gone to 2051. So I presume they're extrapolating that number to 2051. their model is quite different to the way we do our population projections. So this is a top-down model where they do an overall in-migration, out-migration, and then they split it by region, which is what governments tend to do. Okay. If there's no further questions, we might go into individual tables preparing their priority 3 questions. So let's go into that. That'll give you more time to ask them and answer them. Thank you. Well, I've already, yep, okay. All right. So I'll explain it again, just because I probably didn't mention it. Every table should have a facilitator. Every table should write down their top 3 questions, order them priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. We'll have facilitators at each table who will help you. At the end of that, nominate a person to actually present it when we're ready to go. Thank you. 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
All right. But we've got a bit of time.
There you go. This microphone does work. All right. We're now at the question stage. We'll have a roving mic.
Hello.
We'll have a roving mic going clockwise, staying this table. You're first. Ask away.
First question. We looked at question 1, which was an overview of the region, but the question was which other key areas or policies need to be addressed And we thought aged care, medical kind of area was very important for Gawler with a ageing population, and whilst a lot of the people coming to the area may not be young, these people here are not going to get any younger. We thought that there would need to be a lot of emphasis on a transport system, particularly to bind Gawler with new developing areas, because Gawler will be regarded as a service centre for professional services and shopping and all sorts of other things, and we need to be able to let the smaller and developing areas get to the services they need. We were pretty concerned about also the emergency services kind of aspect, where Gawler's quite well placed with all sorts of, like fire, ambulance, health. We've got the airfield for the bushfire bombing and that sort of thing, and that we should be protecting and developing that. We should deepen our tertiary services area so that when people in the new areas are requiring, whether they're lawyers or solicitors or whatever, that those sorts of businesses can be here and in a sort of mature community. Also, business, and we thought mainly the sorts of businesses that we are likely to support would be the light industry and retail. Obviously, we've got the agricultural area south of town, and the huge education industry in Gawler, which we should not let go. It's a very, very important part of the fabric of this town. Yep. So there were a few thoughts from our mob.
All right, we'll move down to table 2.
Thank you. We came in at a slightly different level. We actually started to move further up and looked at the constraints that should inform the capacity of this area. And we talked about things like climate change should inform all in development. We looked at the use of energy efficiency in the housing that could be built in this area. Things like the risks that flood and fire would offer, particularly to the southern area, and that urban breaks would help mitigate that as well as provide green space. We looked at the need to build resilient communities and do things like maintain food production area, because a lot of this area, ranging around to even Concordia, is part of the food bowl for South Australia. So that needs to be considered as well. And everything else we discussed under that type of cascaded down.
Okay. Table 3. I think Dave Barrett's got the mic down there, or Chris, one of the two.
This table took a slightly different focus again, and we looked at the policies that we thought would significantly impact the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan and how Gawler should grow. And it focused around things such as the Integrated Transport Management Plan, concerns around, how do Gawler, or how services provided within Gawler that would provide sufficient ability for growth in these particular areas, whether it's economic growth, whether it's service growth, whether it's residential growth. And it was identified that some of the main concerns was how do we actually navigate and get through. And we had discussions around Cuddler is already a shortcut through to the expressway, and the roads cannot actually support the traffic that's going through there. And we discussed connections through Smith Road. We discussed connections, with future growth in Concordia and, Cudler potentially happening, and what needs to happen at that high level to actually support that growth within Gawler.
Okay. All right. Table 4.
Okay. My name's Tony, and obviously just representing Cudler and Hillier. In actual fact, on the table with siblings, parents, there's 25 acres in Cudler and 10 acres in Hillier just on this table. Just wanted to clarify, the questions we're responding to are all 3, because we've got answers for all 3. We're just doing
You don't pass or fail regardless, but if you've got a couple of questions that you want to ask or statements you want to make, prioritize them in terms of the most important to the least of the top 3.
Okay. Which one? So I guess we'll start with the first one. So policies to be addressed are the land use, having equitable sized land in that area, because we see such a vast range of land sizes.
Yeah.
We also think about the rates that are being paid, and some people don't look after their land and some people do. So there's, and so that's a concern. With regards to the green belt, which sort of feeds into the policy area, the question is, really, it should be, if a green belt's going to be established, it should be on government land.
Right.
Because why should the people that own the land give up their land to form a green belt? So that was the view there.
So you're basically saying that funding mechanisms are pretty critical to how that gets delivered.
Sorry?
Funding mechanisms are critical to how we deliver that.
Well, it's not only about funding, it's about people living there. And, we don't want to see the castle again all over,
Sure.
or the castle. So I think people live in there for a reason. It's because they want to stay there. So, yeah. And then I guess in terms of the green belt, is there a need to have it there? If you look at Playford has moss and they're developing over it. So what's the difference with across the road? Why would you say you can't? You can develop in moss in Playford, but you can't develop in moss in Cudler or Hillier. Yep.
All right. That's probably your 2 or 3. That's fine. We'll go across. Yep.
We were look, that's bad. We want a similar track to these guys here. It's a very okay. Mainly looking at the subdivision and things like that in the southern area. Was sort of said that we'd like the idea of a bit of both, having more of an urban area around the train lines and mix that in with some larger allotments of more like your sort of half-acre to 1 acre, 1.5 acre blocks, a bit further away from the train line. So it'd be a mixture of both. But mainly by having the smaller land, you're going to have more of a green belt because people are going to be able to look after it better and plant more trees and look after that and keep it green. So that was sort of the main things. And then once we have more people in that area, then your playgrounds and sporting fields and all that can be, I suppose, worked out how many people will be using it, what's needed once the people are living in the area.
Yep.
So the other thing to obviously be very aware of in those areas, water supply, just for housing, and also services. So things like your sewage, internet, even's an issue in Cudler. So all those basic infrastructure needs are there as well. They have to be considered.
Okay, so there's some smaller issues between those last 2 tables. That's fine. We'll keep on going on the wall. Chris, can you take those? Yeah.
Hello. Is it? It's working now? Hello. Oh, that one's working.
That's working.
Yes, so basically, actually, some more from the government from where the commercial and industrial zones are actually going to be. Because it's all good to have houses, but if there's no land for people to build commercial, there's no jobs. So we need some real good, clear areas on where the jobs are going to be to prioritise the development. Another thing is the multi-role land. So at the moment, it's all prioritised on high density residential development. There's no sort of country or rural living areas, which even in the development guide it states should be there to on the boundary, but there doesn't appear to be any sort of physical planning for that at the moment. And the last one was more funding to make public transport to be able to get to these areas actually feasible. Because as you know, around Gawler, if you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere. So, you know, again, you need people to be able to get to their job. So you can build a house in Roseworthy, but if there's no jobs around, you're sort of just creating the potential for these unemployment hotspots as well.
Yep. Okay. 2 tables to go. We'll continue on the wall. And then Henry's table last.
Yes, thank you. Our first question related to this graph up here. If you see the black line as the current trend, and you follow that line, you end up on the low option. If you're more optimistic, you end up on medium, and if you're a developer's dreamer, you end up near the top. So, you know, from our community's point of view, we shouldn't be pushed into massive development sort of proposals that are going to, you know, run away with people's lives for decades on no good reason. We've seen it happen before. Pick the high trend and just run with it. It didn't happen. Caused problems. So the second one, looking at open space, the moss really needs a proper look. Needs to add on Ross, which was around a few years ago, regional open space up into North Para, South Para, and the other side of the Gawler River, creating corridors and things. And looking at location, but keeping in mind that in this moss scheme, most of the land is in Hills Face Zone, which is all privately owned pretty well. So there's a hell of a difference between open space, which is mainly, you know, low intensity development, vistas, you know, character areas, rather than public park lands. I don't think we're heading much for public park lands. I think if we can think in Gawler to get across to the river system with open space rather than, you know, government land, we're likely to, you know, see something develop. But anyway, the system needs to be telling us and thinking about, and we need to be thinking, what does open space system through there mean? And how can we get good outcomes for everybody? And thirdly, it was very noticeable in these figures that there's a very low percentage of infill type development in the northern areas, 11% compared to 83%.
Yep.
Well, what's gone wrong? I mean, there's whole areas of land set aside, Elizabeth, Manapara, Tamburlaine, and other areas in the northern areas that were supposed to be, you know, relatively dense in Todd-style development around train stations, and it hasn't happened. Now, that's a government failure. And it's also arises partly because, you know, developers don't want to go into infill development if the greenfield stuff is going ho. They can't make money out of it. So you've got to change the rules here, because that's where, you know, we're looking for 40% single person dwellings. Well, guess what? They're not going to happen at Concordia and, you know, Roseworthy. They're going to happen around the Elizabeth train station, for example, and Mawson Lakes. It's happened to an extent. Hasn't happened up here. So putting some pressure on to do those things will actually take away the need to keep leapfrogging out into rural areas and taking away good productive farmland.
Yep. Okay. All right, that's it. Chris, last table.
We had most of the same kind of concerns. It was more so, I guess, the first one was healthcare. I think you mentioned over there. And with an aging population, obviously. So that's probably the biggest thing for us. And we're new to the area. We've been there a couple of years. And I'm all for growth and expansion. But that'd be my main concern is where to from here. I've seen across the road on Dalkeith Road, Manapara West, that's obviously gone crazy. And I'm thinking on the next point. So that would be my concern. My concern would be the size of the blocks, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, and the mix and how that would work. Anything else?
I think my main concern was healthcare. I work in healthcare. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I know there's been a lot of bombardment on healthcare. I get it. But once you work in it, you see that with the aging population, and we seem to be moving outwards. We have Lower Macmobbery, we have Gawler, which is struggling, and we have Tanunda. So moving outwise, it's great to have parks and greenery. I'm all for that, but you want to be healthy to be able to enjoy them. And I just feel that, you know, and being paramedic when you're travelling out, coming back is quite a distance when we keep moving out. And I guess also roads. So we're in Cutler, and as someone mentioned before, with Dalkeith and Steinbeneath intersection there, I've been to several fatalities at that intersection where we're now going to have a roundabout. So it's really roads that really need to be also focused on.
Okay.
Yeah, so moving the people as well, I guess, would be part of that.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
But pretty much the same as the majority.
Yep. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think we've gone around each table. I'll get Chris at the end of the night, or even now if he wants to start collecting off at each table the priority questions or the answers. And then I think we're now free for the last, we've got another 10 minutes roughly. I'm happy to bring the exec and the mayor up here. Just ask your questions and we'll try and answer it if we can. So I'll get Dave's here. Wendy. Maybe we'll give you guys just a yeah. We'll just stand up here. Just walk up here. Speak at the mic and then it goes into the thing. Yep. Ready? Okay. You can't answer it. Take it on notice. Take it on notice. All right. Chris. All right. Last phase, then you can go home. Okay. So it's just an open forum, really. It's just a chance for you to ask the questions you probably haven't asked already. We'll go around the room and just put your hand up if you've got a question. We'll give you a speaker and microphone, and you can ask away. And we'll try and answer it if we can. All right. So any questions that you haven't already asked? All right. Hang on.
Yeah, a simple question really, just like on a personal level, like we all live in this area and it's very hard to find out like on a personal level, like for each individual, like property and things like that. So just speaking here with Jack, he was saying there's already been thoughts about Helia. You know, it doesn't seem to be included or something, you know, no one's discussing that. And then Evanston Gardens, no one's discussing that. And, you know, parts of Cutler, the further away from the train station. No one's discussing that. And sort of, but how it seems like it's something we're not allowed to like know about or something. Like, or just like to know how we can be in on that conversation and be more informed.
Sure. I think the answer to that question is that we have a report going to council at the October 10th meeting. There will be a version of the desktop report plus the technical report. So the discussion paper, technical report, they'll be available for public to download and to read. As a normal IS meeting, there's opportunity to speak, ask questions. Ultimately, that will go through an engagement process realistically after we've finished what we're doing with this regional plan. So we're talking about really late this year, early next year, more likely. I think the idea of going to community on the regional plan, which we're doing now, plus also the detailed planning, if you like, as to what might or might not happen in southern rural areas around Cuddler, it's a bit too much for people to get their head around. So we're focused on the regional work first, knowing that we still have to have a conversation with affected landowners in the hillier Cuddler area. In terms of the specifics, there are a range of different suggestions we've got in the paper, but we'll discuss that perhaps in coming weeks. But if you want to come and see us individually, more than happy to have a chat to you. But until the report goes to council, I can't really start giving you detailed information. But it's coming in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, one second. Sorry, you're next. You're number 3.
Sorry. Oh, okay. I've got it. So the question is with regards to, sorry, I've got a mental blank.
My name, Andrew.
Andrew. I think you have to come back to me because I've lost it. Sorry.
All right, you're back on again. We'll come back to you. Okay, hang on, wait for the mic.
All right. I have to. I didn't forget the mic. I just don't like mics. So I'm not aiming at anyone in particular, but how does council see the environment in which we live in 30 years' time, and how, in a climate sense and weather sense, we're going to respond to that? And does that worry you in terms of this particular plan?
Well, it is worrisome. Climate change is happening. We've declared a climate emergency, and it is a worrying time because we're going to get more severe weather events. So the Greater Adelaide plan talks about wilder, and I know Paul Kosh had a problem with wilding, but it also talks about social cohesion and being equitable. And I think that's just as important about getting, the many people that will come to live in this region will need to be connected. However, we'll also have cultural diversity, lots of cultural diversity. So we need to do a huge piece of work on social impact. We need to do a huge piece of work on social cohesion to ensure that our close-knit community is still the same in 40 years' time. Now, that's a challenge because once you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you tend to lose that social connection. So that's a big challenge, but climate change is a big challenge for us. We need to plant more trees. We need to have more cultural biodiversity. We need to enhance the river system. That's a huge piece of work, I think, because we've got these beautiful rivers going through our town, and the Gawler River, we've sort of neglected a little bit, and I think it's time to actually focus on the Gawler River, and I think that will really enhance the southern rural areas or the southern urban areas, because that's what's probably it's going to be called in the future. So climate change is a massive challenge for everyone right across Australia, not just for Gawler. And we can learn from others. We can learn from our colleagues interstate. We can learn from international experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we don't have to come up with all the answers. We can learn from others. And I think we've got some good plans. We've got our environmental management plan. We've got our climate emergency management plan. That's a really good plan. It's aspirational, but there's some really good initiatives in there. And I think that, you know, if we deliver on those, we need external funding as well from state and federal governments. We can't do it on our own. Local government cannot do it on its own. Rates won't cover all of what we need to do. So we need to, you know, get smarter at how we do that. And I think we've got a good opportunity to do that with our growth 245, which Andrew goes on and on about. That's a really important piece of work, but social impact, I think that's going to be critical for us.
Ed, sorry. So we'll come back to you in a sec. Sorry. Yep. You got your question back? Oh, you're next. You're next. You're first.
Okay. Just considering this future growth of Gawler, I'm thinking, and also the need for employment and those areas, I'm thinking that this is an opportunity for the council to correct a anomaly in an area down there called the Northern Trade Centre, which has been operating as a commercial area for 30, 40 years when it was first established by Montpara Council. Then it was rezoned by the Gawler Council shortly after a change of boundary. And it virtually restricted the further development of owners of land that had invested money to develop that and have the opportunity of different businesses and to proceed without such things as non-complying. So I'm just suggesting that it's a great opportunity for the Gawler Council to rezone this land to an employment zone. It's a small pocket of land, and I think it'll be beneficial for the council. And
so that's the land around Hales Road, right?
Sorry?
That's Hales Road, that area?
Yeah, Hales Road,
yeah.
And in that little pocket, there's a concrete batching plant there, and there's some commercial properties on the main North Road there. But it basically just goes one, maybe 2 blocks behind.
Yeah, no, it's certainly on the priority list for council in terms of the discussion paper you'll see at the October meeting that we have regard to what the future zoning should be. And on top of that, we've done some work on the lack of supply of employment land in the town of Gawler. We're supposed to have 15 years supply. We've got about 5 to 7 years. So there is a shortage more generally. So there's opportunity for that area to be fractionally bigger than it already is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so 2 parts really. The first is we had a discussion on our table about the fact that, one, people have provided feedback in the past with regards to the zoning of Cutler and Hillier. And the other thing is people didn't show up tonight because they're just sick of giving feedback and not feeling no one's hearing. So I'm hoping that the feedback in the past has been considered. We're not just starting a green slate and asking everyone again. So that was the first part. The second part is with regards to the 10th of October meeting, there's going to be what council will present and we'll be able to see those plans.
Yep.
But the engagement for that is in November, which is after your submission to the government. So it doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't you seek community engagement on that plan before you go to the government?
No, so what's intended to happen is we will go to October 2 main reports. One will be the submission on this, the regional plan, and there'll also be the report on southern rural areas. So our priority is to get the submission to government on the southern rural areas because we have a timeline. We have 6th November for a draft submission, 22nd thereabouts for a final. In regards to the southern rural areas, that's been going for basically 30 years. We need to sit down with each of those sub-precinct landowners, which we'll be doing effectively over 3 to 6 months, which will probably start more towards the end of the year, early new year. And then once we get some general agreement as to where the sub-precinct boundaries might be and the types of zones that might be applied, if we can agree on that as a basic starting point, aligned to the regional plan, then we can go to a consultant doing code amendment work. So that's the pathway for that. It's going to take at least 12 to 18 months to get us in a position where we have an agreed position and probably some code amendments going to the minister in terms of southern rural areas.
So we're a little bit confused, I think, in the community because the greater Adelaide Regional Plan has given us an opportunity to give feedback in the same area.
Yeah, it does.
And yet you're saying we still need to go another 18 months on the southern rural area while the greater Adelaide Regional Plan is steaming ahead.
Well, in effect, what's going to happen is you'll do your response or your submission to government on the regional plan, just like council will. Hopefully, we'll reflect the conversations that have happened tonight, and we'll give an in principle view of what we think the key themes are. We've done some work in terms of what we think might be reasonable in the southern rural areas. That may not be your view. You'll put your submission to the minister, to the commission, if you like, in regards to the regional planning exercise. And your view might be exactly the same when it comes to the work with council on the southern rural areas. But just in terms of logistics and timelines, we can't go and do the community engagement in detail on the southern rural areas until we've had more time. So it's really going to be realistically end of this year, early next year. And bear in mind that the actual regional plan won't happen until late next year. There is still room for the government to go, okay, council's now engaged with the community fully in regards to southern rural areas. We know it's been a fractious conversation for decades, but there seems to be some common ground now. This is what they're saying. That's the best we can really offer at the moment.
I guess it would be good to know that by the end of next year,
yes,
which is when the close or the final plan for the GARP will be announced, that the southern rural areas will also be confirmed by that time. It would be good.
Yeah,
that's the
they should come together very closely because that'd be the goal.
I guess the people in Cuddly area or Southern Evanston just really want to know what to do with their lives and move on.
Yeah,
it's been too long. There's money being thrown around. There's extensions being built, sheds being built, houses being built, and without knowing what's happening in the area.
I guess the challenge has been that, and we've had to slow down a little bit with the southern rural areas work because we had to see what came out of the discussion paper from government, because the last thing we want to do is develop a southern rural areas framework, if you like to call it that, which is fundamentally inconsistent with what comes out of government. That's been the challenge for decades. If we don't get that right, we'll get nothing over the line. We've gone to government back in 2016, 17. We didn't get anywhere in terms of what we were doing, not without considerable effort and cost from council and the community. So we probably needed to see what was coming out, which we've now got. We think there's some refinement required. So for example, in the regional plan, it says the foothills around the sea gas pipeline should be urban. Well, in what universe is that going to happen? It's not going to happen. So there's some refinement still required. We think that should be the focus, knowing we still have to have the, strong conversation with the community and to listen to what's being said and to make sure we can get some general alignment with policy at a state level. The best we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Following on from what Tony said, a lot of people said to me they're not going to bother coming tonight because they've been here and done that. Gawler Council asks and then Gawler Council doesn't listen. For decades, you've run sessions like this and your shelves are full with feedback And yet you have let, as a council, the rural zone fester and sit there, and you've had no master plan whatsoever. And if we go back to 2016, you had a big consultation around Jensen 1. You had 195 submissions. A mere handful of those submissions echoed what we heard one person say today: it's a food bowl. We've got to protect it. All the others said to you, we want the opportunity to develop into something like half acres, which will be a beautiful green transition from the south into Gawler. What did you do? You developed a vision and a set of guiding principles which were in complete contrary to what the vast majority, 95% of people said. This is why people are sick and cynical. Even as recently as 2019, when we finally got Jensen 2 released, and Jensen 2 was a pretty good document because it talked about zones, and it talked about the areas that could be infilled, which was around the cover area. What did you do with that? You had 120 submissions, 8 of which again came from the people who said, no, there's water, we need water, we can get boutique stuff grown. You had on the books at that time a proposal to go for rezoning. You then used a stalling tactic that says the new planning act coming in will have to wait. Well, that came in early 2020. What did you do in 2022? Again, you bought into this singular view that somehow we can get water there, and you spent another, what, 25,000 on the Aris report? And you knew that the GARP was coming. You knew that the 30-year plan was being obsolete. And yet you still spent our ratepayers' money on the Aris report. And the Aris report came back and told us what we already knew. 95% of the land holdings are 5 hectares or less. There is no water. Viable agriculture and horticulture is not possible. And Andrew, if you look at the red zone that you put up there for Greater Adelaide, when you had it on the map before, there's one yellow dot in that area, and that one yellow dot is Cuddler. And I spent an hour last week meeting with GARP, and it's clear, that is the cherry for picking. And you now, as Gawler, have lost your opportunity. There is no chance now for rural living. There is no chance for half acres. Cuddler will be dense urban infill. The only thing this Gawler Council can do is apologise to the people of Cuddler, throw away your vision and guiding principles rubbish, and get on board and see if you can get a broader separation along Dalkeith Road. That's about it. But if you dig in and you make your submission, again ignoring the people of tonight and ignoring all that's gone before, as Tony said, and you stick to this stupid ideology, a 19th century view of separation of Gawler from the rest of the Adelaide metro area, then you will just be totally ignored and sidelined by the government.
I'm not sure if it's a question. There are a few statements. That's fine. Everyone's entitled to a position. Next question. That might be it. Oh, one more. Okay.
Thank you. So I guess my question is just regarding the satellite city concept. Is Gawler on the cards to become a satellite city? And if so, what would that, I guess, eventuate into? And if not, should Gawler be looking into becoming a satellite city?
Who wants to answer that? Me.
All right.
I don't think the discussion paper foreshadows that Gawler will be a satellite city. I think it looks more at areas that are spatially discrete and quite separate, hour-plus drive. So Murray Bridge might be an example of that. There might be other places in a similar category, but I just think we're too close to be considered a satellite city. A regional centre, yes, but a satellite city, I think that time came and went probably 20 to 30 years ago. Yeah. All right, I think that might be the last question. No, one more. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to just have just a bit of a broad statement in regards to tonight and to emphasize a few things, just point of view, perspective wise. So there was talk of the climate change being an issue. I also say housing crisis being an issue. There's a few solutions to that, and it is what we've all been asking for over and over again, is to allow people to develop their land. The more supply of land there is, the lower the prices, people can actually get their foot into a house and actually own a house. And then one more thing I just wanted to emphasize one more time, because it just feels like the council are just turning a blind eye to the people in Cuddler, the majority of the people in Cuddler. And I want to say one more time to the council, you can have your green belt on the land you own. Let the people that own their own private land, let them have a say in what they do on that land. And yeah, that's just what I wanted to say, just to summarize it all.
That's fine. And just in terms of your comment about moss, don't be confused that we're advocating that people should put moss over your land. We don't have a view, I don't think, other than it's certainly in the regional plan that there should be an inter-urban break. How it's done, where it's done, who's affected, no one really knows in this room. I don't know if government really knows. So that's work that needs to be done. Now, if there was going to be impacts on individuals, you would assume there'd have to be compensation and a funding mechanism to basically buy people out. That's somewhere down the track as a conversation. That's not for today. Certainly what we've tried to argue in the briefing we provided to council thus far, and what you'll see in October, is that there needs to be managed change. And that managed change isn't more of the same. So the debate where we've had rural zoning over the whole of southern rural areas, we've not had a position on the river in terms of the Gawler River and what it should be zoned, even though it's got open space zoning in Playford. The fact that we've ignored, well, not ignored, but not dealt with the issue of industrial activity nodes on Main North Road that's been there for 30 years. These are things we do have to address. That saying that it shouldn't be there doesn't help us. The reality is they're there. You've got landowners who've invested money in those areas. How can we get some orderly change or management of those? That's what October 10 will be about. So we're not ignoring you. In fact, we're suggesting there should be perhaps more development there than has been in the past. We're just not necessarily advocating it should all be rural living. There may be some rural living or effectively de facto rural living in some limited areas, but it won't be the whole of southern rural areas. And that's definitely not what the regional plan says, which says future urban. So that's probably where we are. All right, I think we are done. I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of council, the elected members, the mayor. I'm not sure if the mayor wants to say anything to wrap up. I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you want to wrap up anything.
Thank you everyone for coming and for all your comments. We are listening and Gawler will be changing. Keep an eye on the October IES meeting. There'll be 2 reports that might be of interest to you all. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.